So today's video is going to be about Nicanor Parra and anti-poetry. I'm going to hold on a couple seconds to see if anybody wants to show up for this, and then I'll get going. So let me just get a little coffee here. It's been a while. I've been up a while. So today is today's Nicanor Parra's birthday. He was born back in 1914. A few other famous people born that same year. I want to say Paz was one of them. Adolfo, who was a good friend of Borges, Adolfo Borges, also born this day, or not this day, but this year. William Burroughs also born in 1914. So it was I guess it was a year for some movers and shakers, some people pushing some things around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run right into the Wikipedia article on anti-poetry. I have issues with it, but I just want to read a couple things from it very, very quickly. So, anti-poetry is an art movement that attempts to break away from the normal conventions of traditional poetry. Early proponents of anti-poetry include Chilean Nicanor Parra and Greek Elias Petropoulos. So, I say that because sometimes when I say anti-poetry, people think I'm talking about anti-art and Dadaism, and anti-poetry in the way I'm discussing it, the way I've always discussed it, the way I've always meant it to mean when I say I'm an anti-poet, is coming out of these two people's ideas. Neither one were really inspirational to me, but more confirmational to me, as I like to say. I was doing a lot of these same things, and seeing other people doing it said, I guess I'm one of you. I might be anti-poetry 2.0, though, because there are some little shifts I've made to Parra's ideas. Elias Petropoulos' stuff is a lot harder to find, translated into English, but you can definitely pick up Parra's work, lots of it, especially this one, Anti-Poems, How to Look Better and Feel Great. This one's 1954. So he's available. Like I said, Petropoulos is a little bit less available. But I just want to point out there's a difference between this and Dadaism. What I'm going to do before I jump to Parra is read a little bit about Elias. And this is why I say I was already doing some of these kinds of things. So, he described him, Elias Petropoulos is a self-described urban anthropologist. He wrote on aspects of Greek life that were rarely considered objects of serious study, including the subcultures, slang, and music of homosexuals, drug users, and criminals. So, when I look at somebody like Elias Petropoulos, what I see is somebody who's doing very urban writing, very similar to a lot of the things that we get in urban fiction. I would say a lot of urban fiction is a sort of anti-poetics also, more so than, let's say, slam, because it moves away from a musicality. But somebody like Donald Goines or Iceberg Slim are definitely doing some of the same things that anti-poets were doing. And there were definitely some black modernist writers who were doing anti-poetry, and some pre-modernists like Paul Laurence Dunbar, I would think, is one of them. Claude McKay, most certainly. These are all people doing kind of a very urban anti-poetics to a certain extent. And now I'll jump forward to Nicanor Parra and give you the actual rundown. The note on the lessons of anti-poetry. I'll just read them out to you. And this is, I read this out, and when I do my surrealist talk, I will read the Surrealist Manifesto too, because there are a lot of people who say they are things who are not, or should asterisk on it and say post whatever, or 2.0, or whatever, what have you. But so here are the notes, the notes here. 1. In anti-poetry, it is poetry that is sought, not eloquence. 2. Anti-poems should be read in the same order in which they were written. I'm going to take my time with this. The second one is one of the most important things to me. It's actually why a lot of times I call myself a diarist, and I say diaries are rarely rearranged. They are usually written in one order. Stay in that order because you're chronicling something, and time is very important to them. What I would say about the anti-poems, and the reason that I believe the reason why you read them in the same order, in the same order in which they were written, is again to maintain a chronology. And in this chronology, you get a better understanding of chirology. In the way things occur, you can understand how long something is happening and the hows of something happening. When you rearrange that and create a whole new narrative that wasn't the original narrative, it can be very problematic. And it's also forcing life to become a story as opposed to letting things just occur in whatever shattered and scattered way that they are occurring. 3. We must read poems with the same hunger we bring to anti-poems. 4. Poetry happens, so does anti-poetry. What I would say here is, obviously both things happen. Some people say that to be a good anti-poet, you have to be a poet first, which I do believe a little bit of, because you do need to understand how to be able to break away from things and say you're not doing what this is doing, or you're deliberately pushing back against it. So I think that every anti-poet is probably a poet of some sort, or was a poet of some sort, like an ex-poet as I most certainly am. But I don't think every poet can become an anti-poet, because some poets... there we go. I should have turned off my notifications, and I will right now. Sorry about that. But some poets can't seem to push themselves away from certain conventions. So not every poet can become an anti-poet, and I will get to that later about certain poets that couldn't become anti-poets, but use some of those ideas. 6. Often our pleasure in anti-poetry is impaired by our curiosity. We attempt to understand and dispute when we shouldn't do either. 7. Read in good faith if you want to partake, and don't ever find your satisfaction in the author's name. 8. Ask your questions openly and listen without argument to the poet's words. Don't be impatient with the pronouncements of the elders. They don't make them by accident. 9. Hi to everyone. I've always really appreciated that ending, because it seems to symbolize that there's always a little bit more to come, and that in many ways anti-poetry is a bit of a joke. One of the things I say about Nicanor Parra and anti-poetry in general is that many times it's a joke without a punchline. It's a very interior joke sometimes, or it's just something that's very hard to understand. I would say, as I started off saying, that there's a lot of urban fiction that's very similar in style to Elias Petropoulos' stuff. I would say now that there are lots of comics who feel very anti-poetic. Hannah Gadsby would be one of them. Cat Williams' most recent little bit there. It's only like 7 minutes long on YouTube. You can just look it up. It's his latest one. Is a bit anti-poetic also, in that it moves from one idea to another idea, deals with politics, uses plain language, isn't necessarily funny, but you understand that there's some humor that's supposed to be there. So in people that kind of attempted to be anti-poets in some ways, or take some of those ideas, who couldn't quite do it, I would think are some of the beat writers, most specifically Allen Ginsberg. If he's making any attempts at anti-poetry, which I don't like to say he is doing, but some people say he did do, and he would say he did do too, but he misses it because you can't have the shamanic and you cannot have the bardic while also being an anti-poet. Those are very anti-poetry things to do. We want a sense of a very humanistic kind of writing, and not a very divine kind of writing. You don't want anything to feel like it's handed down from above, or that it's going to go anywhere. And certainly we want to move away from any idea of a poem itself being sacred. Even though Nicanor Parra obviously read a lot of Lorca coming up, he's in no way, shape, or form trying to move ahead any kind of like troubadourian type of thing. He's not even really doing canto hondo, in my opinion, or he might have in the beginning, but he's not by the end. It's very important that he's pushing away from these things. At one point, you could say that Parra and Neruda were very similar in styles. Obviously, when they have their breakdown as friends, they also break down in terms of ideas of what they're doing. In some ways, Parra starts to sound a lot more like De Roca, who obviously did not get along with Parra at all and had real issues with Neruda. Another person who's supposedly been a big influence on Nicanor Parra was Huidobro, who was a school of one. Creationism is a school of one. Nobody else was a creationist other than Huidobro, and he's pushing back against surrealism. And I think in many ways, even though I can say I'm maybe an anti-poet or do anti-poetic things, I really feel like Parra, as far as Latin American writers is concerned, or Latinx even writers is concerned, that he might be a school of one also. What I want to do is jump ahead to another person who's kind of related to anti-poetry, and again is kind of a confirmational figure for me, and that is David Antin, who did the talk poems. He was also trying to push away from certain things that poems are supposed to do. Most specifically for him was the musicality he wanted to get rid of, which I absolutely 100% agree with. But again, I call myself a diarist, so I'm not going to fuss and fight about what a poem can and can't do, or should and shouldn't do, and just jump out and say I'm not a poet. But Antin does call himself a poet. He calls himself a talk poet, and I'm going to flip through this book. I never knew what time it was to find something. I like to do kind of a divinatory thing, an aleatory thing here, and just let something find me. But David Antin believed that you could talk a poem to somebody, and I feel like that's very similar in ways to anti-poetry, and not wanting to follow form, wanting to just speak as one speaks. A lot of plain language there, and what David Antin calls plain thinking. One thing I would say that really separates the two is I think Parra's writing and Petropoulos's writing require a certain amount of politics. They are political writers. Nicanor Parra may not have been like the super communist or like most radical guy, but he was definitely a bit of an anarchist, and he definitely had a lot of things going on around him in terms of which regimes he had to live through and how he got to live through them. And I think that his anti-poetics really put that on display, and that's what he wants on display. In many ways, his decision to get rid of a lot of sentimentality is very similar to Amiri Baraka talking about no more love poems. But I'm going to get back to Parra and give you a little bit of David Antin, and these are also unrehearsed talks that I do, which is very similar to the extemporaneous talks of David Antin. So I'm just going to read a couple pages here that I found, and let's see what we can do with this. Because if they know the governor, then this had to occur within the governor's lifetime, and if they can locate this within the period of his service in Judea, working from what the governor's dates were and the age of their young rabbi, they start trying to count back. They count back and they wind up with a number. But there is another question, and I'm going to keep going. But this bit of talk poetry from him, this bit of a talk from him, again has that very a bit of plain speaking, a little bit of politics, and one thing I've always said about David Antin is he definitely has a lot of inside jokes, and I believe that his inside joking comes from, one, his being Jewish. That's very much a part of it. and two, relating to a Jewish surrealism. And I would say that a lot of surrealism has Jewish and Islamic roots. I'm not going to get into that right now. And I tend to push that much more forward than some of these ideas about psychoanalysis and Lacanian ideas of what surrealism is doing. But anyway, I think that David Anton is doing a lot of what Parra does, and you'll see that when I get back to reading Parra. But let me push ahead with some more David Anton here. Do they count back in terms of the Roman or Jewish calendar? In all probability, their rabbi's age and the time of Passover would have been computed by the Jewish calendar, and the governor's age and term of service would have been computed by the Roman calendars from which the Christian calendar was created. But the Jewish calendar has a much earlier first date because it was computed from when the world began, because Jews know when the world began. And again, this is dealing with a sense of chirology, as I brought up earlier, in terms of timing, how long something takes, and not just chronology, which is very important to anti-poetry, to creationism, to surrealism. Time is of the essence, but mostly in a chirological sense. Maybe an aeonlogical sense, but we don't always get back to the beginning. Particularly with anti-poetry, there's no real getting back to the beginning. But in terms of dealing with a lot of Jewish, specifically surrealism, there is a sense of ionology and getting back to the beginning because there's a sense of redemption, which I talked about with Marcel Proust, I talked about with Hilary Putnam, and I even talked about a little bit with Ian Curtis, who's not Jewish and not a surrealist, but I did talk a little bit about redemption in those talks. So let me move on here. So you've got a problem. Days don't work out neatly into years. Days don't work out neatly into months. And the cycle of months don't fit neatly into solar years. The Jewish calendar is based on the lunar year, and the Roman calendar is based on the solar year. So it's not very easy to compute the year with any certainty, and it's no easier thing to try to compute the year 2000. I begin to think that finding the year 2000 is like painting a wave white in the middle of the sea and saying, let's gather there and celebrate. Well, go out to the right place. 575 waves out into the Atlantic. We're going to make an indelible white patch, and then we're going to take our lifeguard boats and go out there and find it. That's what the 2,000 years is like. It's like a white patch in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So you see this very plainness that he could be saying this to you, as I just said this to you. He's just trying to explain something, even if you don't understand necessarily what he's saying. One thing I will say about the talk poem is that I personally would never use a simile. Not a like simile, at least. Maybe an as simile, but not a like simile. And I would definitely reduce the amount of metaphor in general that David Anton likes to use. But we know that similes are kind of key to comedy because they're a very quick transition. Okay, so I'm going to jump into this book now, into Anti-Poems, because this is the most important book for me for this talk, although the man did die in like 2017, so he has a lot of stuff written down, plenty of great stuff to read besides this book, and from here forward it gets a lot better. I would say, if you speak Spanish, definitely look him up on YouTube and get a sense of his speaking and his manner of speaking. There's also some great talks with his grandkids that you can find on Spotify. Just type in his name. You can find some good podcast stuff where he talked to the children or the grandchildren about him and a little bit about his politics too. And he does end up being a bit of an anarchist. He can be a little bit wishy-washy, as they like to say. He was liked by none and loved by all kind of thing. He figured out how to play everything just right. But he's certainly against a lot of what the regimes were about. It's just that he wasn't always very clear about what he was about. But speaking of that, I happen to turn to a very appropriate poem. So, Declaration of Principles. I declare myself to be a fervent Catholic, never caught confusing wagon wheels and wafers. I declare myself a disciple of Marx. Yup. I refuse to get down on my knees. I am a natural-born capitalist, absolutely crazy about caviar. I declare myself a disciple of Hitler. Believe me, I reject all limitations. I am an underground Soviet spy. No, don't confuse me with the Kremlin. In short, I declare myself a complete fanatic. Believe me, I identify with nothing. The word God is only an interjection. It's all the same if he exists or not. Actually, I like this one, but it's hard to read. Mission accomplished. I don't want to read all the calculations on the side there, but it's a very interesting one. I do like all the adding up and the sum totals, and it's actually one of the things that I started doing at a certain point too in a few pieces. I really like that. But I'm not going to read it because I don't want to read the number part of it. Instead, I will give us another flip through and see what I come up with and work my way from there to see where it leads me. Okay, so I'm going to start at the beginning of this poem because I know exactly which poem this is. Something like that. Parra laughs like he's condemned to hell. But when haven't poets laughed? One thing I'm going to say before I go on with this is I appreciate the third person of it, but this particular piece reminds me a little bit of Borges and I kind of thing, or I am Borges kind of thing, where it's like, is the other person really him? Are there two kinds of people? Borges and Parra both make some kind of shifts in their writing around the same time. So there's a little bit of parallel thinking, I think, in the two. I'm sure they read each other as years went on, but maybe not in the beginning. But this does remind me a little bit of Borges in that sense of having an I and a Parra. It also obviously reminds me a bit of some Jungian stuff, even though I did kind of just poop on Lacan earlier in psychoanalysis. But that was for surreal and wasn't for anti-poetry. Anyway, the years pass. At least they seem to be passing. Hypothesis non fingo. Everything goes on as if they were passing. Now he starts to cry, forgetting that he's an anti-poet. Again, you see this time moving. This is the chirology that I was talking about in sense of how long something lasts. And how something is moving. Why something is moving. Stop racking your brains. Nobody reads poetry nowadays. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. 4 defects that my Ophelia won't forgive me for. Old, low-life, communist, and National Literature Prize. My family may be able to forgive you for the first 3, but never for the last. My corpse and I understand each other marvelously. My corpse asks me, do you believe in God? And I respond with a hearty no. My corpse asks, do you believe in the government? And I respond with the hammer and sickle. My corpse asks, do you believe in the police? And I respond with a punch in the face. Then he gets up out of his coffin and we go arm in arm to the altar. The true problem of philosophy is who does the dishes. Nothing outwardly. God, the truth. The passage of time, absolutely. But first, who does the dishes? Whoever wants to do them. Go ahead. See you later, alligator. And we're right back to being enemies. Homework assignment. Compose a sonnet that begins with the following iambic pentameter line. I would prefer to die ahead of you. And that ends with the following. I would prefer that you be first to die. You know what happened while I was kneeling in front of the cross looking at his wounds? He smiled at me and winked. Before I thought he didn't ever laugh, but now, yeah, I believe for real. A decrepit old man throws red carnations at his beloved mother's coffin. What are you hearing, ladies and gentlemen? An old wino bombarding his mother's tomb with ribbons of red carnations? I quit sports for religion. I went to Mass every Sunday. I abandoned religion for art for the mathematical sciences until at last illumination hit. And now I'm someone only passing through who puts no faith in the whole or its parts. It is important to point out that that Parra was a good mathematician and he did physics and stuff. He taught physics, so it is important that when he talks about math stuff, that he's really not, he's playing around, but he knows what he's doing and talking about. Another thing, and I didn't read, I haven't read much about his life because there aren't really any biographies on Parra. Hopefully we'll get one soon. One of the interviews I was listening to with his children, or grandchildren rather, was talking about how biographies aren't really big, I guess, in Chile, at least for writers and artists. And they were saying that there's a better chance that Nicanor Parra gets a biography written in America than in Chile, which I found kind of interesting considering he, obviously lived for so long and through so many different changes in regimes and politics and through the lives of many other poets. It's kind of interesting that he doesn't have a biography, and I would like to know more about how he functioned as a person in everyday life and the effect of his sister's death and things like that too. Do have a little bit more time, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find another piece in here to read. I don't always like turning these talks into readings, but I also know that Parra is not as read as some other people, so I want to give you some more tastes of him and to give you a real understanding of what an anti-poem is and what an anti-poem's potential is if you should want to look at more anti-poetry, and also know when someone's kind of pulling your leg on what is an anti-poem. So, I also like these sketches. Kind of take me back to some Apollinaire kind of stuff. It's weird though, because in some ways I think it's undoing anti-poetry to call anti-poetry avant-garde. It's certainly innovative, but I feel like the idea is to really get at language and to get at a sense of humanity and to get at a sense of just living in general. And so I don't see that as avant-garde. I see that as just fucking doing, as just writing. I think anti-poetry is extremely just writing. It's extremely intuitive. One of the things I like about anti-poetry so much is that in many ways it does remind me a lot of Proust at his best, when Proust just allows himself to just go off and discuss what he wants to discuss and let his ideas come out. Savage Detectives was not a book that I enjoyed at all, but you can also see how Bolaño has some serious love for Nicanor Parra and for that style of writing, that style of thinking. But I'm not a big Bolaño fan. But if you are, you'd probably love Parra also. So let me read this one. No president's statue escapes from those infallible pigeons. Clara Sandoval used to tell us, those pigeons know exactly what they're doing. There's something really interesting in some of these short ones in that the first line is really the title is really the first line. Something that we see with a lot of writers. Obviously, William Carlos Williams used to do it too. And I appreciate it because I don't like titles, so if you're going to use the title and make it the first line, then you're winning. That's already kind of an anti-poetic move right there, like in terms of so many poems wanting to be known for, this is what this poem is called kind of thing, and there are so many people who we look at as being big poets who didn't do that, obviously Emily Dickinson being one of them, not really a title person. So there are hints of anti-poetry throughout a lot of very, very poetic poems. Somebody said that Petrarch did kind of anti-poetic stuff. Obviously, people say it about Shakespeare, too. I brought up Dunbar and Mackay. So it's been there a while. I think he just kind of codified it, and codified it specifically as being a Chileno writer. Wow, that was bad pronunciation, but we'll just let that go. So, let's cut the bullshit. In Chile, we have never had democracy and never will. They are all dictatorships, my friend. The only thing that we're allowed is to elect between their dictatorship and ours. Lenin was damn right. Go on being poor and honest, old pal. Just don't be an asshole. He had a line about returning to democracy and having it just being more of the same, and I kind of like that. At this point in time, anti-poetry and the politics of anti-poetry seem to be pretty pertinent considering what we're dealing with and coming up on our election and dealing with our political response to things. I warn you that first of all, in everything I write, I am hanging from the wing of a fly. That second of all, in everything I write, I am hanging from the wing of a fly, or rather I am clinging tooth and nail. That third of all, in everything I write, I am hanging from the wing of a fly. This particular piece, this particular idea of understanding that you're an observer, I feel is very akin to somebody whose work I don't have on me right now, which would be Philip Whalen. I think Philip Whalen does a good job with that kind of writing also. And both that idea and Philip Whalen's idea played a lot into how I wrote some of my much more observational work and how I end up writing actually a lot of pastorals who, if I want to call a more modern, urban, legitimate poet kind of an anti-poet, that would be Ed Roberson. I think Ed Roberson's urban pastorals are not, I don't want to call them anti-pastorals, I don't want to take pastoral away from him, but they are working in ways that pastorals don't normally work. And they have a lot of politicking going on in them. There's certainly a lot of plain language in them. There's certainly a real sense of removing sentimentality from those things, or at least allowing there to be a bit of a negative sentimentality in certain things. So Ed Roberson is somebody I would say to take a look at if you like, one, pastorals, and two, you want to kind of find an American, I think, who does an anti-poetry very, very well. And I'm going to, before I go, I'm going to jump back over to some David Anton. You should actually look at his book of talk poems if you can find them. He's another one where some of his stuff can be a little bit hard to find, but he's out there. You can definitely Google David Anton. He also has some of his lectures written down, which are really, really good too. So again, I would take a look at David Anton if you can. So let me just jump in here. Oh, he also was really did a lot of art criticism too. If you're into art, definitely look at David Anton's art stuff. I'm not really into art, so I don't understand what he's talking about. I know there's also a large contingent of people for whom art has no relation to ideas and exists only to express emotions. But that idea is so stupid, it's hardly worth thinking about at all. And this is why I love David Anton, and this is why I like talk poetry and anti-poetry. I'm going to read that again. I know there's a large contingent of people for whom art has no relation to ideas and exists only to express emotions, but that idea is so stupid it's hardly worth thinking about at all. At the same time, there are very serious and intelligent people who see an artwork as a container for ideas, something like a suitcase or a blackboard on which the artist has inscribed in a more or less idiosyncratic script a message they could read out once they've deciphered the handwriting. So they study the handwriting, and when they think they've got it figured out, they declare that this artwork says this and thinks that. And they arrive at this notion because they believe that artists, as relatively intelligent people, having intentions and opinions, declare them in their artworks like a traveler passing through customs. I realized I'd never thought about artworks this way, and I wondered whether or not at all reasonable to think so. And around this time, I happened to read something that made me think of this idea again. I picked up a copy of The Nation in the bathroom. We kept our copies of The Nation in the bathroom. It's a magazine we like to read when we're otherwise occupied. I'm going to leave it hanging there, but to allow you to see how David Anton just lets a thought just go where the thought wants to go. He doesn't have to move it around, rearrange it to make the narrative tighter and to make the narrative work in poetic ways. That's what's important about the talk poem, because it's just like I was talking to you and letting one thought move to another thought and another thought. And if there's a gap, then there's a gap. If the transition isn't smooth, the transition is not smooth. In thinking about the transitions, again, I bring you back to saying look at some of the comedy. Cat Williams' most recent one, I feel, has a lot of elements that are very similar to an anti-poem. Hannah Gadsby definitely has those ideas. And I think what I'm going to do... So the David Anton book is I Never Knew What Time It Was. That's the David Anton book. Nicanor Parra's is just... yeah, that was the title. What is the title? I Never Knew What Time It Was. And that's Antin. David Anton with an I. And let me see if I can't just find something here before I run out of time here. I wanted something from Edith Grossman's piece, if I can get it to come up here. And Edith Grossman, you're welcome. Edith Grossman wrote a lot about anti-poetry. And so, similar to what I was just talking about with David Anton, this is from Edith Grossman. She's talking specifically about Nicanor Parra. Language that is not emotively congruous with the subject matter is a basic component of the structure of anti-poetry. The ironic effect of prosaic language in this context underscores the differing points of view of the poem's protagonist and the reader who observes him, emphasizes the disparities between the tone of the work and its intention, and highlights the tensions between connotative and denotative statements which result from those disparities. Parra wants the reader to sense the incongruity and respond to the disparate emotional tones in anti-poetry. He calls his writing a poetry of effective tones that contrast with one another. These effective tones that contrast with one another, I would say, is kind of a similar idea to Robert Duncan. When Robert Duncan says more melee, less synthesis, he definitely wants it to be a bit of a rubbing up against each other. I say, and this is where I say I may be anti-poet 2.0, is I say more synthesis, less melee, but it's still the same kind of tensions that they both want, and even I want a certain tension in a marriage, I guess, in my synthesis. So here's where he also talks about he wants compounded, simultaneous laughter and tears. The theoretical poems, for example, are documents of the delight he takes in discordant juxtapositions of serious, weighty matter and slang-ridden, banal language. The effective tones of anti-poetry are the product of the intentionally inconsistent system of signs which Parra creates within each poem. This inconsistent system of signs for Parra is, for me, what really pushes him very far away from a lot of Black Mountain style of poetry, because I think that somebody like Jack Spicer wants his signs to be very well understood. And it pushes away from, the guy I like the most, Proust, because Proust definitely wants your signs to mean something. And I like that Parra will take these signs and move them around and change them up. In many ways, Nicanor Parra, as a poet, does a lot of what Hilary Putnam discusses as a philosopher in terms of entering into certain psychological states and allowing intentions to come from those psychological states. So now, what is the meaning of this meaning that you're putting out there? That's at least how I've always dealt with him. And I'm going to move ahead here too. The challenge for the anti-poet is to achieve two different artistic effects simultaneously, and to make these opposites complementary. On the one hand, Parra modulates the tensions between the prosaic and tragic elements within the same work and creates a synthesis of comedy and pathos. This is straight up stuff that Aristotle was talking about in poetics, in dealing with drama and dealing with tragedy. So I definitely want you to understand that anti-poetry is a very, very close look at poetics to be able to move things around, shift things, and to decide this is not what I'm going to do. This isn't working for me. This is not appropriate now. A lot of what Parra is dealing with is what is appropriate now in really, really difficult political times in Chile. Amiri Baraka similarly has to do these same kinds of things, and you see it all the time. This is obviously why I say a lot of comedy has very anti-poetic moves, because they need to deal with the moment at hand, and they need to play with laughter and tears. Okay? So, in other words, he stresses the emotive signals to the reader. In other words, he stresses the differences between the prosaic comic signs and the tragic, pathetic signs, so that the reader is constantly aware of their ironic incapability. The idea of him even dealing with this ironic capability. I mean, obviously, irony goes all the way back to, probably poet number one. You definitely see it in a lot of Don Quixote is dealing with irony all the time. Borges definitely plays with irony all the time, but it's even there. It comes back very, very much to the forefront in dealing with how we discuss metamodernism. Metamodernism wants a sense of serenity, as opposed, a sense of sincerity, maybe serenity also, but wants a sense of sincerity as opposed to all the irony. But the irony can never really be lost. So what happens is there's a movement back and forth between the ironic and the sincere. And this is something that he does himself here, where he wants to have distance between himself, thus that third person. And he also wants to deal with... he always wants to deal with having some distance between himself, which creates a sense of irony, but he also allows himself to be himself for that sense of sincerity. And thus his work really deals with realism, and I would say that not only does Nicanor Parra deal with realism, in many ways he deals with a hyperrealism. He takes a very close look at things and understands what kind of illusions are out there and how people are being manipulated, how ideas are being manipulated. I mean, this is the work of any political writer anyway. And I'm going to jump ahead in this article to a small poem in it by him. I was born a delinquent. Stealing flowers by the light of the moon, I beg the whole world's pardon, but I do not admit that I am guilty. And then I'm going to move on. The reader experiences a subsequent reaction which intensifies and compounds the ironic structure and is necessary for the fulfillment of the poet's intention. Parra makes certain that language is ordinary. He makes certain that the language is ordinary, the circumstances familiar, and the backgrounds commonplace. Again, the commonplace and the ordinary, all of this sounds exactly like what's been going on in a lot of urban literature, urban fiction for a very, very long time. Starting, of course, with Harlem Ren people, right up through to Sister Soldier, right up to Quan, right up to Jaquavis, and many other urban writers through Goins and Iceberg Slim. And I would say there's a lot that's very similar in terms of a parallel thinking. We shamefacedly have to accept that our responses would probably be the same as the protagonist if we were in his situation. At this moment, the ironic distance becomes too close. The reader stops being removed. And this is where I kind of separate from him and put a little distance between myself and Parra, is that I don't necessarily want people to be that close, but we have different intentions, I guess. But again, I would say that in dealing with Parra, we really need to understand a sense of his place and his time to understand why he wants to close a bit of the gap. And a lot of Latin American writers of his time, I also felt were trying to close a certain gap there to get people to listen and to re-understand things. You get a sense of this with Borges, especially as he gets older. I think you got a sense of that with Clarice Lispector. Obviously Neruda. I don't think we get a lot of distance in certain people. Allende also, I think, wants to close the gap and get people really close. But for me personally, I'm always creating that distance, and that is something you do get from a newer sort of anti-poetics, is to put a distance in the space if there is a new anti-poetics, or if we don't want to just take another name for ourselves. I think I'm going to call it there for Nicanor Parra and anti-poetry. I certainly will discuss him again as I get back to David Anton. When David Anton's birthday comes up, I'm sure I'll get to Nicanor Parra again. When I do return to a humor show, because I kind of cut humor short last time, really wasn't in the mood to discuss it. And actually, even today, I saw some pretty bad humor, not in terms of it being tasteless, just in terms of it being ineffective humor. And coming up, there will be Hank Williams. I will talk about Neil Peart. I'll talk about Guy de Maupassant. And I think that'll be most of our Virgo writers. I'll have to look again. And then we'll jump into, we'll move on ahead with Libra, and who knows what Libra's got for me. I haven't really looked ahead for Libra. I have a feeling my favorite writers aren't gonna come up until Capricorn, but we'll see. I will do a 2 Chainz also. 2 Chainz is also a Virgo, and I will do a 2 Chainz, and not necessarily all trap music, but I will discuss Dirty South. So in 2 Chainz, I will definitely allow us to have some really, really Southern stuff like Trick Daddy in there, and I will definitely discuss Ludacris and people like that. And that'll be coming up soon. That'll be my Virgo season. Thanks a lot. Bye.